Hello, I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine and welcome to Inner Voice Show. On this episode, we're going to talk about relationship, finances, and a whole lot more. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm an author and an international speaker. I have hosted my own television show, Inner Voice, in a satellite program for 16 years. Whether it's premarital counseling or through their marriage, how to deal with children, and if they're going through a divorce, to teach them how to communicate better together. In actuality, I think my job is very important to work with individuals and the couples in order to make the most important relationship of their life healthy, which makes them healthy. On my Inner Voice show, I actually interview some of the prominent psychologists and entertainers in English, and I also speak to some of the psychotherapists who are Iranians and the artists who are Iranians, and I speak in Persian to the Persian population around the world, from Iran or Europe or Japan, Australia, all over the United States and Canada, because obviously I was born in Iran.
Where's Dr. Zeine? Dr. Zeine?
Hello.
You also have been trained in my specific methodology and techniques, correct?
Yes.
Are you willing to talk to her after this show?
Absolutely.
And tell her the step-by-step that she needs to do to deal with what I believe is an addictive personality?
Yes, absolutely. The family goes through a lot. For boys who are becoming girls, the fathers of the family suffer. They will keep being confused. They look at all the childhood pictures that they've took of their son, and now they look at somebody who's standing in front of them and supposed to be their daughter. Coming up, I'm going to be talking to a psychotherapist about awareness integration model. You really want to know what that is, huh? Coming up. Stay tuned. Hi. I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine, psychotherapist, and I'm here with Nasreen Bafordari, licensed marriage and family therapist. We're going to talk about awareness integration model, a psychological model that I have originated, and Nasreen Bafordari is one of the first therapists who has actually learned and has been utilizing it with her clients. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. This is an honor.
Some of the major topics that I actually talk to my clients who are couples are first talking about sexuality. Many people don't know how to talk about sex. Concept of communication about it is something that I actually have to teach the couples and how to do. We talk about sexuality. Many people come into their sexuality in a very automatic way. We can go through the whole experience and wham, have a great time, but being with another human being, it actually takes skills. So becoming aware of every area of how we think, how we behave, how we feel, how we communicate with another human being in order to have an amazing sexuality is part of what we also teach in this AI model.
So much of our sexuality.
People don't talk about finances a lot. They don't have a system. They come from two backgrounds of how they actually have created their finances, and I have to help them create a system and have a great communication in how to follow the system. Another main topic is when they actually have children. Now remember, two people, two backgrounds, two cultures, two sets of values are coming in, and now they actually have to bring those together, and that's where they need how to communicate, be flexible, and really negotiate on one way of handling their kids. Duet, sometimes you guys are entering each other's space and singing together, and then solo. How does that experience for you?
The funny thing is,
in-laws, we have to deal with them. They're always there. They're going to be there. We didn't marry them, but they came with a package. So somehow we have to really, really work with them. And if I have to actually add one more topic that I've had to deal with a lot of couples and individuals, is addiction? Whether it's an addiction to alcohol or drugs, pornography, cell phone, computers, is one aspect that it really, really affects the person's life and in their relationship. With people who are going through recovery from addiction, they've had some sort of a trauma in their childhood. And when we've worked with the awareness integration model with them, clearing the trauma, the choice and the chance for them to relapsing is really minimized. I have been in the field of psychology for about 25 years. I started with seminars in ontology and psychology almost the same time. And I know you were part of the pilot study that we did, and in the result of that pilot study was that people were actually minimizing the depression 76%. They were minimizing anxiety 64%, and their self-esteem was rising about 43%. Now those are astonishing numbers.
You know, I wanted to go through it. I wanted to experience what my clients would experience. So I asked you to work on me as a model for the group that was being trained.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, you can see more on my website and my YouTube channel. And if you want to contact me, I'm on Facebook and Twitter. Bye-bye. Hello, I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine, and welcome to the Inner Voice Show, a show that is about all that matters to you in your life from a psychological perspective. And I do talk with the experts in the field of psychology and all the fields that are related to human development, and most of all, experts who are related to what's most important in your life. Now today I'm really excited about having someone in my show that not only who's a therapist, who's a marriage and family therapist, but he's also a filmmaker and who's also has personal experience about what he's going to talk about. Isn't that exciting to have all three of it together? Now today my guest is Paul Ginocchio. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He has a private practice in San Francisco Bay Area. He's a certified relational life therapist and sex addiction specialist. He's the creator of the film The Courage to Love, one of the first documentaries ever made about sexual addiction and recovery. Let's go watch a little bit of the documentary and we'll be right back with Paul.
With the sex addiction, it's like, I'm sad to say that I know what it's like to be sexual with somebody 6 times a day, with 6 different people, 15 minutes apart, like clockwork, and for years. Did that for years. To me, that's sex addiction.
I surrendered in handcuffs. You know, I had a blue light special, and it was exhibitionism got me arrested. Sitting in strip clubs didn't get me arrested. Getting lap dances didn't get me arrested. Picking up hookers didn't get me arrested. And looking at porn didn't get me arrested. You know, sticking my dick in a glory hole didn't get me arrested. I did a lot of crazy behavior.
And when I discovered that I could have sex with men in volume anywhere, for me it was like, well, it doesn't matter who, doesn't matter how, doesn't matter what sex, doesn't matter what age, doesn't matter what they look like. An orgasm's an orgasm, and the more the better. And so no, I wouldn't say that was enjoyable, but it was highly addictive.
I have lost sometimes 5, 6, 7 hours looking on internet pornography, masturbating twice, 3 times, even though after the first time I felt so bad about myself. I was like, oh God, I never want to do that again. And then an hour later I'm on again, searching around. That's out of control. It's out of control to shut my phone off so nobody calls me. It's out of control to feel like a guilty monster when I walk out in the world because of what I've done. It's a very hurtful addiction to have. It hurts yourself, it hurts others. And I think the most hurtful thing is that it's still not widely recognized in our society.
I mean, it's a disease absolutely of darkness and living in shadow, especially the whole sexual aspect of it. You know, I mean, I don't think anyone really wants to be an alcoholic or a drug addict, but a sex addict.
Go to a sex club. Go to a strip club and look at the 50-year-old guy who's slumped over and has had 5 drinks and is spending the rent money on some dancer.
There's so many articles that come out, and I collect them and I put them on the board and I give them to my clients so we can see that we're all over the place but undiagnosed.
I mean, there's people getting arrested, there's people losing their marriages, there's people that can't stop masturbating to pornography, there's people that, you know, are wanting to kill themselves.
I want to stop, but I can't stop. Hiding in the shadows of my desires. But nothing is enough. It's an endless desire for something more, something I don't have. And I always come back to the pain of my life. This is the routine of my insanity. I am addicted.
Looking back at my sexual acting out, and you know, all said and done, but you know, by the time I got into recovery, I'm talking literally hundreds and hundreds of anonymous encounters with men.
Like, to me, that's sex addiction, to really distort that sex act and to really, like, to do it over and over and over and, like, to just become so used to it that you're numb.
When I'm in that state, physiologically I'm affected, like my hands are shaky, I get sweaty, I feel my heart races, and it's kind of a feeling like I'm really hunched over and I don't want to see anybody I know.
I am addicted to my own endorphins, to my own dopamine. I don't have to go score it on the corner at 2 o'clock in the morning. I carry it with me.
It was literally a trance. It was a trance that I would get in, where I would be so preoccupied by it. I had my own ritual that I would lose track of time. I would be totally just checked out.
It's very much like being a drug addict. I used to be a drug addict. And I know I can feel that same feeling of being when I used to do cocaine or crystal meth, especially that, you know, the stimulants.
Anytime I was on a road trip or a vacation or anywhere where I was on a freeway, I was so preoccupied with when I could get to a rest stop so that I could cruise the rest stops and find a man to act out with, and that was all part of the altered state.
This is much more like an eating disorder than it is like drugs and alcohol, because you're supposed to live your whole adult life without doing crack cocaine. You are, but you're not supposed to live your whole life without sex.
Well, Paul Ginocchio, wow, I am so amazed. First of all, the name of the movie is The Courage to Love. I want to actually applaud you with the courage for yourself to do this work, and then have other people talk about it, because as you said, this is the first documentary, and we don't have a lot of people who are willing to talk about this, so it helps so many people. So welcome to my show, Paul.
Thank you, Foojan. I appreciate it.
So tell me, first of all, how come you chose this beautiful name, The Courage to Love? Because I remember the first book that I read about The Courage to Love had actually to do with molestation, child molestation. And first when I heard about your movie, I'm like, wow, is this a movie about that? And then it was like, well, not about that, but somehow, you know, there was a courage there. But you called it Courage to Love, and I really wanted to know what it was about this title that captured you.
Well, I didn't know that about the book. Thanks for sharing that. The title, actually, the film, as happens probably with books too, I started with a working title, which was From Wreckage to Recovery, and then I changed it to
Coming Out of the Shadows, based on the book of Patrick Harn's Out of the Shadows. I had it Coming Out of the Shadows. But then when I interviewed Jay in the film, he says in his interview that my life didn't start to change until I prayed for the courage to love.
Oh.
And I remember when he said that, I just said, oh my gosh, I think that's the name of the film.
Right there.
Yes.
there.
Yes. So we were talking about 4 different stories that you have captured from different people, from different perspective of how sexual addiction can get created. And many of them, it showed that there's something going on in childhood, definitely starts at the beginning of our sexual era, or the place that we actually begin. Some of it even started for some of those people previous to that, previous to their teenage years. And some element happened where created an attached pleasure with some other action, and then it got involved with shame and secrecy. And all of those were some sort of an they were influenced in a very, very young age. Can you say a little bit about the dynamic of sexual addiction as you've experienced it yourself, and you've worked with so many people in your practice? And what is it about sexual addiction that is different than the other types of addiction as it begins, as it starts?
That's a great question. I do believe all addictions start in childhood, and what makes sex addiction different is it's such a loaded topic. Just sexuality, I think, is a loaded topic. I don't think I can speak for myself. My family never talked about sex, and yet we had Playboys on our family room coffee table when I was a kid growing up. And so, again, there's a lot of secrecy around sexuality, and again, I'll speak for myself. In my family, at least, there was, and yet I was one of the people in the film that got exposed to pornography or pornographic materials at a pretty young age. It was Playboy, but it was really young, 10, 11, 12, to be seeing these magazines there with fairly almost naked women on the covers. It's a lot to handle as a young person, and then not to be able to talk to my parents about it, and not having any idea if they had sex or not. For me, that became my drug of choice. And I think some people choose alcohol, some people choose food. I think it finds you in a certain way. I would make up. Mine happened to be sex, and it started with Playboys when I was 10, 11, 12 years old.
It's interesting, Paul, because I know that a lot of people see porn as something which is norm, and it's okay, it's even fine, and it's even healthy for people to just look at porn and masturbate with porn, and that's all okay. Not many people really look at it as addiction. I think that since porn has been so accessible via internet, now some people are looking at it as porn addiction, but most people who are the addicts, obviously most addicts are in denial no matter what type of a substance or behavior they use. But more than anything, I think that the concept of sex addiction has been associated with different kind of fetishism and some of the other stories that you had in the documentary. But the concept of a porn, watching porn lately has come into this space of addiction. Where is the distinction necessarily between watching porn and not being addicted, and is it a healthy concept, or is it that no matter what, it turns into addiction?
Well, and then you have to even ask the question, what is pornography, which I think people have tried to answer for years now. And so I'm a big believer that it's not about the pornography, it's about a person's relationship to the pornography. And so I'm not going to judge people who watch pornography. I'm not going to judge pornography, but I can just, again, speak from experience that for me, at a pretty young age, it started to take me over. Just like a drug addict gets taken over by meth. I started to sneak it and hide it and want it and need it, and it became something that even I remember about 16, 17 years old, I remember even talking to a guy this is a long time ago too, I'm 47, about like, I think I might have a problem with pornography. And he's like, yeah, you don't need that stuff. And I mean, that was a long time ago for me to even, I didn't even know there was, the idea of porn or sex addiction back then. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I really kind of started to see that it's the same as my mom had an alcoholic boyfriend when I was like 20 years old, and I saw him like disappearing and shaky hands and being in control for a while and then being out of control. And I was like the same way with porn. I would cut college and go to a video store and rent porns when I was feeling like anxious about giving a speech in my speech class. And I started to kind of back then associate like I'm using this as a drug. Although, I didn't know there was an addiction or even a term for it back then. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I even heard of sex addiction through a 12-step program.
And in your program, in the documentary, you have 3 other people's story. One gentleman who actually has become exhibitionist, and he enjoys that, and he gets addicted to that piece, and he does get arrested, and he does have legal ramification. We have a lady, her name is Sylvia, which she talks about how she gets involved in this matter, and then she goes into prostitution. And then we also have another person named Greg, who, interestingly enough, although he's straight, but he becomes addicted to having sex with men. And you go through the stories and some of the hardships that they've had from the beginning, which led them to becoming addicted in the form that they got addicted. So it's fascinating to know how you came about these 3 people, and how come out of all the different types of addiction, these 3 were the ones who you chose besides yourself, but those 3 were the ones you chose to put in this documentary film.
Well, in a way, they chose me. I mean, I really tried for a couple years actually to get interview subjects for the film, and although I knew a lot of recovering sexual addicts and sex and love addicts, no one wanted to be in front of a video camera because of the risk of losing their job or their children seeing it, and so it was a very tough film to make. And so Jay was actually the first person I found. I found him on the internet. I searched on Amazon.com one day for memoirs on sex addiction, and his book came up. I never even heard of him before, and I ended up contacting him after I read his book, and he wrote about his exhibitionism and his whole recovery process in his book. And so I actually drove up to Seattle, where he lives, from California here, and he put me in touch with Greg, who he knew, and so they were my first 2 interviews. And then Sylvia is in the Bay Area here with me, and I had known her from recovery circles, and so she agreed to be in the film. I tried to get a variety of people, black, white, gay, straight, transgender, whatever, and this is basically who came to me and volunteered to be in the film. I think they all have great stories. You mentioned about the showing how we go back in time to see a little bit about their childhoods, and for me, what I wanted to reflect in the film was that we all had a wound that happened when we were young, and they're all different wounds, and then we kind of act out differently from those wounds sexually, but that it does start with a wound. And Sylvia's wound was neglect. She felt neglect in her household. She felt neglect from her father especially, and really thrived as a prostitute on the attention and validation that she got from men. I mean, it became a very addictive process for her, but it was based upon that original wound of neglect. And
it was interesting with her, because I remember she said, it really stuck for me, because I talked to a lot of people who also have had child abuse and child sexual abuse, where there's this dichotomy between knowing that there's abuse, feeling empty, feeling bad, feeling shame, and then side by side feeling pleasure, and at times thinking, wow, this is not bad, and I'm getting the attention, and my body's feeling some pleasure in it, and then side by side you're having all of the negative emotions of shame and pain and emptiness. And this is exactly what I was hearing from her through that through your documentary.
Yeah, it gets to the point where we all have to hit a place where we embrace the truth, which is that this doesn't quench our thirst. It doesn't fulfill our hunger for what it is, which again I believe, the title of the film, it's about love, it's about connection, it's about feeling loved and loving, and we all kind of went sideways to try to deal with this wound that we had, and all hit some kind of bottom in our life to wake up and say, I don't want to be chasing this, as someone I knew years ago said, fool's gold. It's like chasing fool's gold, and it doesn't provide us what we really want and need.
The story that is about Greg, which was very fascinating to me, because throughout this story, and I hope that everyone who's watching this that goes in to the website, thecouragetolove.com, and purchases the documentary and really watch it, because I think it's amazing. So whether someone in your family has sex addiction, whether you might think that you have sex addiction, or just want to know about it, I think it's a great documentary to get. And unfortunately, we don't have time to show all of it. We're going to show a little bit of it, but I think that one of the most fascinating one for me, and I've been in therapy, and I've been a therapist for 25 years and worked with many people who've had sex addiction. But the piece was also very fascinating for someone to be straight, and then yet his sexual fantasy and sexual addiction was to have sex with men. And it all started with getting pleasure by oral sex. Like he was that's his first fix, that he actually enjoyed giving oral sex or receiving oral sex. And that's how the addiction began, and it had nothing to do with his own orientation or who he was in real life in intimate relationships.
Yeah, and I get that with clients, and I obviously Greg in my film I talk to about it, and it's a hard one, and there's not one answer for it. In his case, he looks at a lot of more of a father wound issue in him, that he was seeking the love he didn't get from his dad. I know it doesn't really make sense, but that validation he would get over and over and over again through sex with men was, again, it was trying to resolve that wound in him. And again, it didn't work, but it was this repetition compulsion that he did hundreds and hundreds of times, even though, yeah, in the film, I think a lot of people get surprised with the fact later on in the film you realize he talks about being in a relationship with a woman and
yes,
and not being able to stop cheating on her with men, and it's like he sees himself as a straight man, and I have clients that come in who have this, and some of it, what I hear is it's the accessibility, that there's just so many men out there on the internet that you can go have sex with within 2 miles of your house. On your GPS you can see where they are, and it's accessible. But I don't know, for instance, I never acted out with men, so I think that you have to have something either in your arousal template, or again part of your wounding, or maybe part of a kind of a bisexual tendency you have. But again, Greg's vision for his life is to be in a long-term relationship with a woman, and I always ask clients, I'm like, can you imagine having waking up in the morning, cuddle up to a guy, and taking a shower and having breakfast and going shopping? And they're like, no, I just have sex with guys. So it's not about being in a relationship with a man for some guys, and that to me it's more about an addictive process.
It is fascinating. It's fascinating in how the way that our wound takes on its own life, and then we all try to cope with it in a particular way, in the ways that we formulate our addiction, in sort of different kind of behaviors or substances. I want us to go and watch a little bit of the documentary. This piece is about you, and let's go watch it and then come back and explore it again with Paul.
Well, pornography for me has been a big part of my addiction. My family growing up had Playboys on the coffee table, and when I was about 10 or 11, I started to notice these Playboys. I started to notice, like, wow, right here in front of me there's these magazines with images of naked women. I would start to find my favorite magazine, Playboy magazine, and bring it into my bedroom. And then when I started to masturbate about 12 or 13, that just even made it more of an addiction for me, of like, obsessing about the images and finding my favorite images and then collecting those. When I started bringing those Playboys into my room as a kid, it wasn't just the titillation factor, that was a part of it. But I was also in a lot of pain, even though I didn't know it. I had a mom who, you know, was a good mom in a lot of ways, but she was married to a man who wasn't available for her, so she found refuge in us 3 boys, which felt invasive to me at times, and so I would rebel against her a lot and push her away.
Okay. Congratulations. Yeah. We always wanted.
So I grew up with like a feeling of feeling a little invaded by my mom, although feeling loved too, but feeling extraordinarily terrified of my father. My dad was very physically abusive to me. My dad was a very terrifying man. You never knew when his temper was going to explode, and when it did, it was scary. You know, it was like very scary. So I started to find refuge in pornography with Playboys in my bedroom. Now at the time, like I said, I felt it was just like a little boy in puberty looking at naked women. But now as an adult, I can look back and be like, you know, it was a little hurt boy who was actually seeking an escape from the pain he was feeling in his life. And so, you know, an addict likes control. And when I was in my bedroom with the door locked and that Playboy magazine and in that lost in that fantasy world, complete control.
Little boy, addicted to running away, hiding wounds behind adult walls. Pleasure numbs the pain and loneliness of breathing, lost inside a secret world of sexual fantasy and body parts, searching for happiness with voyeuristic eyes, denying the side effects of this oblivion. Familiar demons of shame and guilt are resurrected. The pain of reality is only an orgasm away.
The Playboys started my addiction to pornography, and just like any addiction, like smoking pot can sometimes lead to heroin, Playboys led to hardcore porn magazines. Those hardcore porn magazines led to videos. Those videos led to the internet. The internet led to just an explosion of me spending 5, 6, 7 hours on the internet looking at pornography images. So the pornography, starting with the kind of innocent little boy in Playboy, kind of grew into this monster of a thing that I couldn't stop doing. I could not stop masturbating to pornography. So a lot of people know the concept of a bottom for an addict, you know, and for an alcoholic it could look like, you know, when you wake up in the gutter one day or when you lose your marriage or whatever. And it's the same for a sex and love addict. You face consequences that have, you know, severely impacted your life in some way. So my biggest bottom so far in my life was, I guess, every sex and love addict's worst nightmare, which is actually losing a big relationship in your life because of the disease. My bottom was I cheated on my girlfriend. And did something I never thought I'd do. I paid for a sexual act. I went to an adult massage, and the woman massaged me. At the end of the massage, she gave me a hand job. And so all of a sudden, here I am in this relationship, and I have a secret. So paying for an adult massage led me to go to this place called The Gates, which caters to people with fetishes. And then I did it again. And so I had like 3 slips when I'm in a relationship with a woman, and I just decided I have to tell her. So I told her, like, look, I've paid for sex and I've, you know, had this secret life going on. She was more devastated by the lying than she was by the fact that I'd acted out sexually. When you lose trust in a relationship, it's so hard to repair it. I was a good boy for a while, and then I had a real bottom. I did something I never thought I'd do in my life. I started cruising areas where there's prostitutes. Every big city has streets where there's prostitutes. In Oakland, there's 2 streets. There's San Pablo Avenue and there's International Avenue. And I started a habit of like cruising these areas at night, never ever thinking I'd pick up a street prostitute because I'm so above that, you know. I mean, I can get any woman I want, right? I'm a cute guy. And so I started cruising these streets. I started cruising San Pablo Avenue at night. I started cruising International Boulevard. I'm never going to pick up a prostitute. Then I started talking to them. So I started to pull over and I'd have a little conversation. I'd go, oh, that girl's, man, you can tell she's on crack or she's messed up. Well, kind of this flirting with disaster over enough times me cruising these streets, you know, it's kind of bound to lead to, like, finally I meet a prostitute that's actually, you know, makes my addict go, woohoo, you know. And like I said, I did a behavior I never thought I'd do. I picked up a street prostitute. She performed oral sex on me. And that was, I think, my biggest bottom. I'm driving up and down International Boulevard, I find myself feeling more and more like almost like a creature. Like I'm hunched over, I'm shaky, my eyes are beady, and and it's a rush. It's a shame rush and an excitement rush at the same time.
Addicted to the streets, scanning the night with predator eyes, searching for heroin in high heels, a trick, hunting for a fix, U-turns and side streets, circling the prey, young woman on lonely street corner. Oh yeah, she can take me away until the pain of another day.
So I'm in a relationship. I've now hit my bottom, which is going and picking up a street prostitute. I got to get out of this relationship. I got to work on myself in a way I can't do in this relationship, apparently. So I broke off the relationship. Really, really, really hurt. Obviously, a woman that thought she was going to marry me. And ever since that time, I've worked really hard on recovering.
Paul, thank you for the courage to do this. And it's amazing. We were talking about how vulnerable we become when we put ourselves out there. And sometimes it is so important to put ourselves out there in order to talk about issues that people really don't want to talk about. It's uncomfortable for them to talk about. And when it's close to our heart, when we've actually gone through the experience and have experienced it personally, that's when we can really help other people. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for bringing such a concept that it holds so much vulnerability and shame for people and pain underneath it to the surface. So as I listen to you in the documentary, and I listen to you, and I get that you've worked through a lot of those concepts. So tell me a little bit about the wounding and how to work through the wounding. So one part of it is we are definitely at one point in denial. After denial, we realize that there's something is going on. Now, the realization could be something that we have as an insight ourselves, or that we find ourselves into some sort of a problem, or we betray someone, or we get into a legal position. Somehow we finally say, wow, I am addicted. This thing has gotten me and I need help. And from where? What's the process?
Well, so the breaking through denial is so important, and unfortunately, many of us have to have a big reality slap to basically surrender. Is what I say. You need to surrender to actually start to get better. And as you just saw in that clip, I mean, I had to really lose a relationship and really faced the power of this addictive behavior had in my life, and I was never going to get the life I wanted unless I got help. And so for me, it started with the 12-step program, which I think is awesome. It's not for everyone, but for me it really helped to be around other people who identified in such similar ways as I did, and had a lot of the same wounding, and acted out sexually in certain ways that I did. And again, we're all a little bit different, but there was a lot of the same energy. But really just having a community of people to come to and get support from, and be able to call when, because it doesn't go away overnight. And so I'd call guys in the midst of, hey, I'm going out to act out right now, and I want to, but I don't want to, so I'm calling you. So it's about willingness to ask for help, get support, lots of therapy for me, group, individual. I've done a lot of work, in terms of just men's issues. I was in a men's group for almost a decade, just a regular men's therapy group, just talking about stuff, but really learning how to be intimate, emotionally intimate with other men, because I think that a lot of this is about intimacy and learning how to share oneself and be vulnerable and honest. And then I could learn how to do that more and more with a woman, which is what I wanted. And so it's a big process, Foojan. I mean, there's not one recipe, but I think 12 steps and therapy are pretty vital to healing.
So when someone comes to you because they've realized that they have some sort of an addiction and they have some sort of a hurdle to walk through. They can't hold on to what's going on anymore, and they can't stop what's going on anymore. So they're in that phase of, somebody help, because I don't want to do this and yet I can't stop doing it. And when they come to you, what do you do? How do you start the process? What do you say to someone who is coming to you from a sexual addiction perspective?
Well, especially since I've done the film, Foojan, I will strategically disclose. I think a lot of clients I've gotten over the years appreciate that. I don't talk a lot about myself, but now that my film's out there, I think it's it's available for people to watch so they can see my story. I think people, from my experience at least, they like to know that you've been in their shoes, and so I have I have different things I do. I'm being certified in the sexual addiction therapy model by Patrick Carnes, which I do some psychological testing. A big sexual dependency inventory test I have clients take to kind of see how big or not their sex addiction is, to identify. Some people aren't sex addicts. I mean, I'll have clients who come in who's had an affair, and they're like, oh my God, I'm a sex addict. And then I do assessment and testing and get to know more about them and realize they're not really a sex addict. They had an affair for, there's a variety of reasons people have affairs, right? Addiction's a different phenomenon. I mean, it's really and I know that from experience, and I'll share that with clients. It has a power that is, you can't deny that it can take you over, and you will do just about anything to get your fix. And so I speak in kind of layman's terms with clients. I do a lot of psychoeducation. I make clients read books because I think there's some great books on sex addiction that you need to read and learn about. A lot of workbook stuff I have them do, and yeah.
So one of the things that you were just mentioning, which is interesting between the addiction, which is sex addiction, and food addiction, which is very different than other addictions, because most of us, when we want to get treatment for any other addiction, almost unanimously all over the place, we go into abstinence. We do not use that substance or behavior anymore. We do not go where those substances or behavior are being used. For example, if someone is a gambler, they just stop going to casinos, or they'll stop going to places that they're going to play cards. Or if someone's using alcohol or drugs, that's what they're doing. They stop going to places and they stop drinking or using the drugs. But when it comes to food addiction and sex addiction and love addiction, and what I mean by love, I mean by relational pieces, the romantic part addiction that everybody goes toward, not everybody, the addict ones go through. These three types of addiction, because it's not healthy to go completely abstinence. You cannot not eat, and it's not healthy for you to completely be in abstinence about sexuality or being in an intimate relationship. It takes a whole different dynamic in how to heal and how to shift your system in doing something in a healthy manner versus the addictive part. And in other modes of addiction, because you go into abstinence, it gives you the time, it gives you the space, it gives you all of that in order to find all of the emotions that are coming up, learn how to cope with it, look at the wounds, try to heal the wounds from childhood, all the traumas that have happened, and clean up those things before, and then you create a system that actually you can create a healthy life and a balanced life. But when it comes to food addiction and sex addiction and love and intimacy addiction, it takes a whole different ball game, because it starts from the beginning where you have to be exposed to the area that you're actually addicted to, and yet figure out which part is healthy and not. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I strongly recommend and push for clients to take a time out from sexuality. I really like to do 90 days, and believe it or not, we can survive 90 days without an orgasm. We can. Yes. That was one of the more powerful parts. See, I use a lot of my own recovery. I don't necessarily tell clients, but that was one of the more powerful things I did in my recovery process, was taking a 90-day celibacy period, because it really made me realize how sex was like way too important in my life, and how my brain was so habituated to wanting to masturbate or look at porn or sexualize women, and to take a time out from that intentionally is very powerful. So I always have clients try out a contract around that, and I try to get their spouses involved if I can, because I think it helps to have accountability and you know, and hopefully support too at the right time with the spouse. But so I would say you have to learn that, you know, you'll survive without it, that you know, you need to work on for 90 days the stuff that's driving it in you and start to learn more about that, and it helps to unplug a bit. I don't pathologize sexuality. I think there's all kinds of sexual preferences, and I don't even necessarily like the term fetish because I think it's a negative term. I mean, it's okay if your thing is lingerie on a woman, right? Or a man, for that matter. But it's again, it's your relationship to that, and it's like, you know, is there need to be any kind of moderation with that, or is it something that you can use in a healthy relationship and it's okay? You know, again, it's about learning. Part of it is learning what a healthy sex plan is to you in terms of long-term recovery, because, you know, we're all sexual beings, and you want to hopefully have a good sex life with whoever you're with, and that can be fun even for a recovering sexual addict.
It's interesting because as you were talking, it brought up these subjects that when you, for example, go through abstinence of 90 days, if it's minimum 90 days that we do, a lot of the craving that comes up, and then a lot of emotion comes up. For people, anxiety comes up, depression comes up, because they had their fix, so it would really, really surge a lot of chemicals in their brain. That's why they were going after it. So there seems like there's a phase of being in a particular emotions and state of being that they have to tolerate and learn how to handle, so that they can heal themselves and become healthy. And handling those emotions and then healing the wounds that have happened is amazing. And I know part of what you did in your healing, and that you talked about in the documentary, is coming to terms with your dad and the woundings that you had felt from your dad. And do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, I included that in the film because I really think my father wound was a huge driving force. Even though I didn't act out with men, I think I was just so wounded by our relationship, and it was a self-esteem injury in me. And so I chose to get self-esteem oftentimes by conquering women. Like, I was like a real serial dater and really hurt a lot of women, and it was based on this wound of not feeling esteem for myself, right? And so what I did in the film, and what was part of my recovery process, was making an amends to him. He died when I was 20 years old. I'm 47 now, so he died in 1989 of AIDS, actually. He was cheating on my mom with men, and I make up he was a sex addict himself. I don't know, because that was a long time ago. But he acquired AIDS at a time where you couldn't get AIDS and survive. If he would have gotten AIDS 5 years later, I think he'd still be here, because the medication came around so quickly in the early 90s. But anyhow, I decided, as part of my recovery process and my amends making, was, even though he did a lot of things to injure me in my life, very abusive man, very angry, abusive, I had to look at what I did to hurt him, because I was very angry at him, rightly so, because I was really hurt by him. But, you know, I stole money from him. He was a lawyer, a very high-power lawyer. I got arrested when I was a teenager and embarrassed the heck out of him in his community, multiple times, by the way. And so I was really kind of punishing him, I think, for the wounding I felt. But as part of my recovery, it made sense to me at a certain point to make an amends to him for that part of my... And I went to his grave in the film. He was obviously... I couldn't do it in person because he's not here, but doing it in his grave for me was very powerful. And so I just wanted to share that in the film, because I do have a lot of clients. I find that when they get wounded by a certain parent, they will not talk to that parent. I even, at this last screening I had a couple women come up to me and say, you know, I was angry at that moment in the film when you made amends to your dad, you know, because I haven't talked to my dad in 10 years because he abused me. And I get people who tell me this, and I said, well, it's not for everyone to forgive your abuser, but For me, it was more about me taking responsibility in my part of our dysfunctional relationship.
That's
that
so
was
amazing
just,
when you said that, because accountability, taking responsibility and accountability for who we are and what we did in relationship and what we do every day in coping with those wounds, and how we create this coping mechanism that at one point we thought it was working for us and no longer works for us, helps us to be able to feel powerful versus the powerlessness that we do feel about those emotions and the traumas and the addiction. And this is a powerful way to feel power and to gain power, is by taking responsibility and accountability. Thank you so much, Paul Ginocchio, The Courage to Love. I really want to commend you with the courage that you've had. Thank you for coming on my show. Thank you for expressing, again, your life, your wounds, your healing process, to support people who are watching this program and who can watch your documentary, to take it to heart, to take care of themselves, and really take on some steps. And those steps are important for everyone who in any format is suffering with any sort of addiction. And some sorts of addictions are easier to be in public in, and some other ones are not as easy to be able to talk about, and they're more vulnerable to talk about. So it's important for people to really look at what addiction does to their life, and that every single person who's an addict deserves to be healed in all matters.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Anything you want to say as last words to my audience?
All of us can overcome addiction, in my opinion, just because I've lived through it myself, and it's a wonderful life to be free from it.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much again for being on my show. For all of you who are watching us, thank you. And please go to the website, thecouragetolove.com, and get a copy of this documentary. And please watch it with friends. Allow yourself to get educated about this matter. As we were talking about, porn addiction is becoming widely common, and because of accessibility to porn, a lot of your teenagers are starting to do the same thing from age 10 or 11. They're on their phone, iPhone or any type of phone, and they're really experiencing this. So I think for every parent to watch this documentary and get more understanding about what sexual addiction is, it's really useful, and it really takes care of yourself and your family. Thank you for being with us. Until next week, create a wonderful, wonderful day and a life for yourself.